Welcome, everyone. Welcome back to the Last Fireflies podcast. Today's episode will be hosted by Robbie. Hi, Robbie.
Hey.
And I, Ani. And we have a really special guest today, which is Andrei. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation to our podcast. We will talk about fireflies, the exactly name of our podcast. And I'm really happy to discuss about this really sensitive topic, but also magical topic. So, Andrei, I will ask you first to maybe tell us a bit about yourself. And I know that you also researched for your thesis the fireflies population around Cluj-Napoca. And I would like to know why this topic, why made you chose fireflies out of all the beautiful insects you are fascinated about?
So I'm Andrei. I'm doing a master's in systemic ecology and conservation. The subject of my master's thesis was, initially it was meant to be a bit more complex. It was meant to be studying the effect of artificial light at night on firefly populations around Cluj-Napoca. But I quickly found out that no one studied firefly populations at all in Romania. So I had to do the base work first, of actually going out and seeing where these populations are and how big they are and how they're doing and stuff like that.
Wow, that's interesting that nobody researched it.
Yeah, even in the literature, it's mostly people finding fireflies while doing other studies and just mentioning them. Like someone does a study on some other sort of beetle and then they publish a list, and on that list there's like 2 entries for fireflies. Or someone does a study on the stomach contents of frogs and then one of them ate a firefly at some point.
A very charming topic, I believe.
So the information is quite limited. Yes. The reason I chose to study fireflies was mostly because after I finished my bachelor's, my dad asked me at some point if I knew what the deal was with fireflies, because he hasn't seen one since he was like in middle school and like going on mountain trips and seeing them at night. So he asked me if they're still around. And I didn't know what to say because I genuinely did not have an answer. So I decided that I'll study it. I'll do my thesis on this question.
Oh, that's so nice and sad story in the same time. I think it's like every article I read about fireflies starts with a similar story of like someone asking like why they are not around. So can you tell us what are like some of the threats that actually makes them disappear slowly, as we know that their population is decreasing in the last years?
Yeah, so fireflies, being insects, sort of face the same pressures that other insect populations face, as well as some more specific pressures of their own. You have the very general effect of pesticide use that affects not only them but also the source of their food. In Europe, the most common firefly is the Lampiris noctiluca, which is the European glowworm, I believe is the common name in English. It feeds mostly on snails and slugs, but mostly snails, which are also affected by industrial, agricultural pesticide use.
Mm-hmm.
There is also the threat of land use change, forests being cut down, wetlands being drained, things of that nature, that threaten the actual firefly populations and again the prey species that they also rely upon. Fireflies, generally speaking, they are quite a stationary species. So even though they can fly, the actual populations struggle to migrate properly. So this makes them extra vulnerable to any sort of disturbance, because populations cannot refill their numbers via migration, and disturbed populations can just pick up and go somewhere else. This also, in the long term, makes the entire species, or like their species in general, more vulnerable to further disruption because the amount of genetic diversity is reduced, and that makes them more vulnerable to all sorts of different pressures. Yeah, these would be a bit more general and quite specific to their reproduction cycle is the effect of Allen, which is not a person, it's an acronym for artificial light at night, which is what I initially wanted to study, but realized I need other sorts of data first to do it properly. And this is exactly what it sounds like. It's big city lights. It's even like street lights, stuff like that. Fireflies obviously rely on their bioluminescence to signal to other fireflies to mate.
Yeah, those magical flashes, not like the communication signals that they have.
Exactly. So the things that we think are very pretty and look magical to them have a very concrete purpose. That's how they find each other, basically. And it varies from species to species. Each species has its own pattern. This is how scientists also identify specific firefly species by the pattern of the flashes or even the color.
Do they have many different colors, like in the flashes?
Yeah, not entirely different, but like maybe like sort of different hues, I guess. It's generally the same color. There's no like red fireflies or something. They just some react differently to tiny changes in the light spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and this artificial light at night, even if it's not direct light, if it's just ambient light, this lowers the contrast between the individual light of the firefly and the surrounding space, which makes it harder for them to spot each other, which directly reduces the efficiency of the reproduction, which in turn also reduces the population. So it's sort of like a domino effect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so light pollution is often mentioned, but I think it's really interesting what you mentioned also in the first part, that all these like monocultures practically that are killing the larvae that they have, because as much as I know, they stay for quite a long time until they become fireflies. No, they like stay in the ground or something like a larvae. Can you explain a bit like more about how their life look like?
Their life cycle.
Yeah, exactly. So their life cycle, you were correct. They mostly stay as larvae. They only become full-fledged adults when they have to mate. So this is usually in the summer, June, July, that sort of period. For the European glowworm, other species have their own, specific periods, but it's usually the same sort of pattern of them being mostly larvae, and then when they're ready to mate, that's when they specifically become adults to mate. Sort of like butterflies, I guess, in that sense.
Or ladybugs. Maybe a lot of people don't realize that ladybugs also have this life cycle, and they think of the ladybug just as a ladybug, but most of their life is spent as larva, which looks very different. I learned this by like having a small garden now and trying to find larvae of ladybugs.
Mm-hmm.
Because they are also predatory species and they help manage other insects, and it was interesting to learn exactly what the ladybug larvae look like. But I think it's also a species which people do not realize that they have a full life cycle, which is spent mostly in the larva form.
Yeah, the amount of time a firefly stays in a larval form is actually determined by its environment as well. They can stay for shorter or longer periods depending on the resources available, because they do need to fatten up in a sense before they pupate and turn into adults. So bad seasons can have them sort of skip a year and like stay as larva for longer.
Yeah, so then when we talk about pesticides used in especially monoculture industrial agriculture, it's not only killing the worms and the snails that are actually their food, but it's also killing them as larvae, no?
Yeah, absolutely. They can be directly affected as well as indirectly. Them being predators, they can also accumulate these toxins that they eat from their prey. So yeah, there's a lot of different pressure points when it comes to pesticide use.
Yeah, and I know, for example, that in Romania, there are like huge monocultures of corn and sunflower that are dominating the lands. And often they are treated with a pesticide that is called kind of like neonicotinoids, something like that, which is actually banned at EU level for their toxicity. But it's still granted derogations here. And I think these derogations, they were lifted really recently, but still local practices and the ecological needs are like very far apart. And I was wondering, what do you know about the more specific Romanian context about the fireflies? What did you discover besides the fact that, of course, they are decreasing in populations because of all these reasons that you mentioned before?
Yeah, so the overall Romanian situation of firefly population is very much uncertain. Just me doing one study is definitely not enough to, paint a full picture. In other places, there's been, experts doing surveys, even like citizen science projects, trying to get a hold of, the scale of the population decline of insects, but also fireflies. I do not believe Romania is exempt from this general decline that we've seen everywhere. There is no reason for Romania to be a safe haven. But also, we simply do not have enough information. There hasn't been enough work done to fully and concretely say, okay, the population has decreased by this much because of this, and this. The most I can say confidently is that Romania is also subject to the same decline. I'm not sure of the precise scale. A lot of work needs to be done. In Romania, there are 7 different firefly species. I have only managed to study one of them, the most common one. We're not even sure in Romania if all of those 7 species of firefly are actually real. There might be less, there might be more, who knows? No one bothered to look properly. So unfortunately, I wish I had more answers, but in the Romanian context, there's definitely just a lot more questions than answers in this case.
So maybe at this point we should ask what is the state globally of firefly populations, and just like to give a small insert here, because as Ani said, the name of the podcast is influenced by the fact that relatively recently there has been some publications saying that we might be the last generation that sees fireflies. But of course, there are, as you said, in Romania, there are 7 globally. There are 2,000 or something, a lot of firefly species. And certainly not all are going to disappear within our lifetimes, but some might be. And we chose this name more as a political mobilizing, call to action or warning than a descriptive term that these are really the last fireflies. But could we be the last generation that sees fireflies? How accurate is this?
Alarm call?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the good news, I guess, is that we're probably not the last generation to see fireflies generally, but we are definitely the last generation to see some of the more vulnerable species of fireflies. Generally speaking, ecosystem collapse isn't a one-time big event where everything just disappears. It's sort of a trend of simplification, of reduction. It's just there being less life, generally speaking. So fireflies will continue to exist. There will be probably less variation. That means less species and also less diversity within species as well. Even if species don't go fully extinct, their numbers are certainly decreasing. So they will be harder to spot. They'll be more rare to see. The baseline of how common fireflies are would definitely shift to where it's an actual huge event to see one compared to 50 years ago where it was every summer.
I know that many scientists call fireflies indicator species. That they tell us something or more about the overall health of the ecosystems they live in. And I do wonder, what do fireflies tell us about the ecosystems they are living in? If they are more or less, or what's going on? Do you know why they are called indicator species?
Yeah, so indicator species, generally in ecology, that's a term used to describe species that are either sensitive or entirely reliant upon very specific conditions. specialists that rely on a certain plant, for example, or things of that nature. So their presence can be used as a stand-in for us actually checking, the pH of the soil or something. If you see a plant that's an indicator species for, more acidic types of soil, you see the plant, you say, okay, there must be acidic soil here. So fireflies are a good indicator species for a couple of things. Again, this also depends on the species of firefly, because the European glower might tell us some things, and then a Japanese species of firefly might tell us another thing. There's also species of fireflies that rely on water for their life cycles. So again, that tells us something about the quality of that specific water, if there is a firefly population there.
Surprised to see the fact that the fireflies populations are decreasing everywhere globally in many different ways. It really tells about how our ecosystems are actually decreasing in their diversity or in their quality. So I think that that's the alarm bell that is actually beyond this last generation of fireflies. So maybe we not be the last generation of some species of the fireflies, but if we are the last generation of specific species, that's already bad, because it tells us about really ecosystems that are damaged and already influenced so strongly by climate crisis, of course. And I was wondering if we can connect this information that we gathered about fireflies with the climate crisis, like how are rising temperatures or unpredictable rainfall or extreme weather events affecting firefly populations.
Yeah, so I suppose the main threat of climate change when it comes to fireflies would be drought and generally speaking, drier climates, because fireflies, especially in their larval stage, they rely on sort of humid forest understory to hunt in and also just live in. So the drying of these places combined with their deforestation, for example, can just definitely reduce firefly population quite significantly. Also, sea level rise in some cases, in places where that's relevant. There are firefly species that rely on mangrove forests that are also threatened by a variety of things caused by climate change, besides sea level rise.
I read about a study that found that increasing CO2 disrupts the reproductive cycle of some insects directly by, for example, some insects search for places to lay their eggs by detecting the plants that emit more CO2. They detect the CO2 emissions from individual plants. And so because the background CO2 level has increased so much in such a short time, they get confused and they don't lay their eggs in good places, and so their populations crash. Or for some, the temperature increase and CO2 increase disrupts their pheromones that they use to reproduce in some way. So there are very unexpected ways in which also climate change is contributing to the decline of insect populations. I don't know if some of this applies to fireflies.
Yeah, no, definitely. There are impacts of climate change on firefly populations that we are probably not fully aware of, especially those more habitat specialist species that might have unique interactions that we haven't studied yet.
Yeah, I just want to add earlier that, as you said, that probably mostly the species that are more like generalists, that are adapted to different environments, they will be the ones that will be less affected, and the ones that are specialists, they are adapted to a very particular kind of environment, and so they are geographically usually also maybe very localized. Those will likely disappear, and some species have experienced 70, 80, 90% decline in a few decades, in 40 years maybe. So there's a lot of these studies that show that for particular species, they went almost extinct in half a life, in 40 years. So there will be places where people used to see fireflies a lot when they were kids, maybe in the 70s, 80s, and now you probably cannot find any.
And Andrei, from your research, do you see them as resilient? Do you think that they can adapt to this rapid change? Because I know that some argue that species can adapt to rapid change, but others say fireflies are too specialized, as we mentioned before. And from your research, can you tell us how this looks like in the species you looked at?
Yeah, so fireflies, generally speaking, are probably going to be on the losing side of climate change. Again, because of what I mentioned previously about them not being quite mobile enough to find better places or take advantage of new habitats. They cannot follow basically the new temperature gradient that forms, so things like that. They can just move somewhere better, so they're gonna be outpaced by the change. Again, the European glowworm isn't as big of a specialist as some other firefly species that occupy salt marshes specifically, or like mangrove forests or these sort of things, where the habitat themselves are also quite unique and quite vulnerable by themselves. The European glowworm relies mostly on forests, but also grasslands, and more importantly, these two habitats being next to each other, because in the larval stage they rely on the forest, and then when the time comes for them to reproduce, they move to more open areas where their signals can be more visible. So the European glowworm might fare a bit better, but yeah, it's also very mobile. The females do not have wings. They remain in a larval sort of form for the entirety of their lives. Only the males have the ability to fly. So the populations go basically as far as the females can crawl.
And also the glow, no, it's only the females are glowing and the male are just like looking after that glow in the spring, no?
Yeah. In the European glowworm, the females are the ones that signal, and then the males basically follow them. In other species of firefly, it's different. Sometimes both signal, sometimes they don't. It's a case-on-case basis.
I would just add something about the speed of climate change. I think it's something we need to repeat again and again in the podcast, because maybe some people say that, climate has changed in the past and species have survived. So even if some people have to move, there's nothing drastic that's going to happen. However, although CO2 level has been higher in the past than now, but the speed at which CO2 and the temperature is increasing now is unprecedented in Earth's history, at least in the last 500 years, beginning from the time when complex multicellular life appeared. It's increasing 100 times faster than even the biggest extinction event, which was this great dying, I think 270 million years ago, where 96 or something percent of marine animals died, 70% of terrestrial animals died. Now the pace of climate change is 100 times faster than during these great extinction events. And if you have some major changes, animals can adapt to that. In particular, the way animals adapt to warming is the ones that can. They migrate north or they migrate to higher altitudes, to mountains. But if that changes too fast, then they cannot move fast enough or they cannot adapt fast enough. And there has been nothing in the history of the Earth, at least in the last 500 million years, that compares to how fast things are changing now. So there is a real risk that we will have one of the biggest mass extinctions now in Earth's history due to current climate change. And so that's just to put in context the discussion.
Yeah, and like to underline that all these changes that are happening so fast is really due to our lifestyle, no? Like all the monoculture and pesticide use and the globalization and all this like big city lights. It's so much about humans only and their human needs, and we really don't care. Like we prioritize only this and we ignore the fact that the whole ecosystems are actually affected by these choices. And in the case of monoculture, and let's say that we go back to permaculture, we tried to regain control in a bit of going back to diversity and really encouraging that. But if we lose species of fireflies or other insects, that's really hard to get back. So maybe I would like to ask Andrei and also Robbie and all of us, what action, big or small, can communities or individuals take to keep fireflies glowing in the future?
Yeah, that is a very good question. I think the first thing that anyone can do is just go out and look for them. You can't really protect something without getting to know it first. And we can talk about, these general threats that fireflies are facing. Oh, it's artificial light. Oh, it's, pesticides. But in concrete cases, it's not gonna be light in general. It's gonna be maybe one big stadium light that has its lights constantly on. That some people, locally might be able to change. Or if it's in a sort of a rural community, it's maybe encouraging your neighbors not to rely on pesticides as much, and maybe, showcase that, hey, having some insects is actually better for you and also cheaper. Yeah, I think just getting out there and knowing where your neighborhood fireflies live is a very good start to just actually help them keep going.
Maybe just to end the segment, every species has a value in itself and the right to live, and there's a value in biodiversity. But I was thinking just maybe let's think aloud about the value of fireflies even to humans, because they are like an important experience, maybe in your childhood at least, and they have a cultural significance. Fireflies appear in literature and movies everywhere, and just thinking that there will be people in the future that during their whole lifetimes will not be able to see fireflies at all. Just thinking about the huge loss to all of us.
Yeah, it's also a major loss at a landscape scale, whereas some of our ancestors could have just went up a hill in early mid-June and just see a whole field of just fireflies. That sort of spectacle is just not gonna be around anymore. Even if fireflies themselves survive, that specific quantity and the integrity of their habitats is just not gonna be there anymore. So the experiences people can have in what remains of the wild is just going to be, significantly altered. And it is a shame because as far as the insect goes, people generally don't have the best opinion of insects, but everyone sort of likes fireflies, just conceptually. They are quite widely appreciated by everyone.
Yeah, and I think there are also quite a lot of folklore and myths around fireflies all over the globe. I know that in Italy, in the rural folklore, fireflies were thought to be the souls of the departed visiting their loved ones. And I think that that's very beautiful in a way. And I think there are a lot of other myths and cultural understandings of what that glowing tells us, because it's kind of spooky, like spooky in a nice way. I've been a year ago or 2 years ago in the Nera Mountains in Romania, and we were in the middle of the mountains, practically with no villages or anything around. And in the middle of the night where we put in our tent, a lot of fireflies started to appear from nowhere. Like it was just surrounding you with all those like little sparky things. It was really like a place where they were thriving. I will tell you, Andrei, to go and number them there, because that's for sure an ecosystem that's still in a good shape. And that also told me, like, oh, actually, this is a really nice ecosystem we are in. Fireflies are happy here. So that's already wonderful. But all those lights around me really created a magical environment, made me feel like in a story, in a legend. It was really beautiful. So I think that that's something that maybe we are not in touch anymore with, because we don't have this experience anymore so often. But when you had it once, it's something that you can't forget and you really want to keep.
Yeah. I remember, Annie, you said once that you had like a ladybug, not a firefly, but a ladybug like walking on your hand, and you said that like if it would be any other insect, it would be like, ooh, like, but like ladybugs or also fireflies are some insects that are appreciated by everyone. And there is something to be said about so-called ugly species that are not considered to be, urgent to preserve them or whatever. But if you are not even fighting for the species that we like appreciate and love, and like what are we even doing as humans? Why? Like the question of why would we not?
Okay, we got emotional. I like it.
Well, with that question, maybe we can close the discussion. Thanks for this, Andrei, and hope people enjoy it as much as we did.
Thanks for having me.
If you like our work, or at least think it's useful, help us spread the word by smashing that like button, like it's the face of a fossil fuel executive or something. That's cringe, but please subscribe anyway.